Today I'm going to show you how to make the perfect drywall patch. If you've ever done it before, you know how difficult it can be. Now there's a lot of different methods out there, but most of them involve floating the patch with mud, which makes a small problem much larger. It means you have to do a lot of sanding to smooth it out, and to be honest, sanding is the worst part of having to do drywall repair. There are patch kits that you can buy at your local home improvement store that have a self-adhesive back to them with a steel mesh plate that you can put over your hole. However, they are quite flimsy, and being that they are on the surface, that means that you have to float the mud out. Same as if you were to use a drywall plug like this, where you've removed the sheetrock and insert that into the hole, and then using this paper as your tape, you still have to float it. What I'm going to show you today is how to recess the paint and texture right where your seam is, so you can put in your fiber or paper tape and fill your seam as opposed to floating it, leaving you with a flush and even surface to then lightly sand and then texture. Now, if you already have a hole in your wall, say from a door swinging open or somebody's fist, as opposed to trying to square up the hole and then cutting a piece to fit, I would suggest taking a piece and cutting it larger than the hole and placing it over the hole and then tracing it and then cutting that out so you have an exact fit. What I'm going to show you today would be as an example if you had to remove a piece of sheetrock in order to access some plumbing or electrical or something behind the wall, and then you want to put the patch back in as if it never happened. There's a couple different ways you can cut that out. You can use a utility blade, which is difficult to do. You can use a drywall saw, which is better, but also difficult to do. Or you can use a sawzall, which is much quicker, but it can also do a lot of damage much quicker. Now what I like to do is put my hand against the wall and slowly turn on the sawzall and barely tip it in to get it started, and then drag along using my hand as a pivot point. Now I'm never sticking the blade straight in because I don't want to hit anything that could be behind the wall, such as plumbing or electrical. So I'm going to make my cut on this line here, and then we're going to remove this piece, and then I'll show you how to peel back the paint texture so that way we can recess our tape and then we can mud it. So I did not cut all the way through with the sawzall blade. I'm going to finish it off by putting in my utility blade and drawing it across the cut line that I made with the sawzall. Now it should be loose. However, I could tell with my blade that right here there is a stud. Another neat trick is you can take a magnet, rare earth ones are stronger, and you can find out exactly where the screw or nail lies beneath. If you're lucky, it's a screw and you can back it out by putting your drill right where the magnet picked it up. So now we should be able to remove this, and then we can get to slicing on that line and removing the texture and paint on both this part and this part, so when we put our tape in, it's nice and flush. So I will show you on the wall first, and if you're lucky, it'll come off in one piece. If you're unlucky, you'll have to tear it off in a bunch of small pieces. It's worth it, however. So you want to score it deep enough that you're going through the paint and through the texture, lightly scoring the drywall paper beneath. Now if you land on a seam, it'll be a lot more work because there's more mud there and it's thicker. And depending on how much paint and texture is on the wall will determine how easily this peels off. You can kind of just work your utility blade in behind the back of the paint and texture and peel it off. Careful not to stab yourself. Like I said, sometimes it'll come off in one nice long strip, and that's really satisfying. However, it's breaking up in pieces here, and it'll be a little bit more tedious. However, your end result will be much better. Like that. That's ideally what you'll encounter. Okay, so now I'm going to do the same thing on this side. And if you already have this paint, that's great. You'll be able to touch it up after you're all done with the texture. However, if you don't have the paint, you can go to your local hardware store with a small 1x1 sample, and they'll be able to custom match it pretty close. So by doing this, you're going to give them a large enough chunk that they can match it, so when you are completed with the patch, you'll be able to paint it and hopefully it will completely disappear. Would have been nice if it all just peeled off, but as I said, it's still worth it. We were lucky we didn't land on a seam where it's a lot thicker with mud, because that's a lot harder to get the paint and texture off. Okay, almost got it. All right. So now you can see that with that in there, we're able to put our fiber tape in there and it's recessed so we can fill that. However, I need some more support behind that, otherwise it'll just rock on that stud. What I like to use is MDF, which is inexpensive. It stands for medium density fiberboard. It's easy to take your drywall saw and score it so you can snap it. And it's easy enough to screw into, so you can put it right in behind the wall and run some screws in to give yourself a backer for the sheetrock that's going to go in place. So now I'm going to stick it in the hole and I'm going to fasten it with some drywall screws. Alright, so after I put the MDF backer in and then I screwed in the piece of sheetrock. I then put in my fiber tape inside where we pulled out the texture and the paint, so now it's recessed, and then I applied my first coat of mud. And I used a powdered type of mud that you mix with water, and it sets up in either 20, 45, or 90 minutes. You can use the all-purpose mud that comes pre-mixed. However, it can take up to 24 hours until it's dry. Now with the quick set mud, as soon as it starts to set up, I use the 20-minute. It's been about 20 minutes now. I can take a damp cloth, and as opposed to having to wait for it to completely dry and using a sanding sponge that's going to generate dust, I can lightly come in and sand down the texture and mud in the seam here and not generate any dust. And I don't have to wait for it to be completely dry. Just want to make sure that your mud is set up enough to where if you touch it, it's not going to interfere. And at this point in time, another neat trick, you can take a flashlight and hold it against the wall, and you can see where your high and low spots are and where any imperfections are. You can see a patch here that somebody had done before my time. That's pretty rough. So we're going to go ahead and get ready and mix up our second batch of mud and do our second coat. So I'm getting ready to do my second coat of mud, and this is the 20-minute powder mud mixture that I'm going to add a little bit of water to and mix thoroughly until it reaches the desired consistency. It should be a little thicker than pancake batter. You don't want this stuff to set up in your pan because it's like concrete. So make sure that you are able to work within the 20 minutes and get it all out of there. I'm now going to take a 12-inch knife and then just clean that up a little bit. I'll let that dry, wet sand it again, and probably do 1/3 final coat, and then it's ready for texture and paint. Okay, so I've got my third and final coat on, and now I'm going to take my wet rag and I'm going to soften the edges again using the wet sanding technique, and go around the edge and make sure that I have softened that edge where the mud is meeting the texture and paint. Because that will stand out if you don't sand it, either dry or wet. And once you're happy with the result, and it no longer needs sanding, you can either use a heat gun or a hair dryer to completely dry it, and then you're ready for texture. Now this is a can of texture that you can adjust the size. It works really well for medium to fine. It does not do well for heavy knockdown or for heavy orange peel. And the can recommends that you run it under hot water, and I recommend that you do that as well. That helps pressurize the can and give you an even and consistent spray of texture. And you can adjust the dial on the back and use a piece of cardboard to get it to the desired pattern that's going to match what you have on your wall. And then just go in a circular motion. Spraying all of your patch and feathering in to the existing texture, and it should blend it nice and even. And that will shrink down a little bit. This is a water-based formula, and it will shrink down. If you have any big chunks, you can kind of tap them with your finger and get them to settle a little bit. And then once that's dry, you're ready for paint. And to speed that process up, you can there again use a heat gun or a hair dryer. And I would recommend putting at least 2 coats, if not 3, over any new patch. And this whole process can be done in about an hour and a half using the quick set 20-minute mud and the technique that I've shown you here. And that is the best way to get perfect results for any patchwork that you have to do. You can see there that that is blending perfectly with the wall because we recessed our tape seam as opposed to floating the patch. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something, and hopefully you're able to do this on your own and achieve professional results.